I have to confess, I've always had a love-hate relationship with the Dutch Reformed Church and Calvinism, but John's speech, made me soften my position a wee bit. Thank you, John. And this is a tough act to follow because the first presentation was exquisite, and I only hope that Josh Viss runs for Congress from this district. I want to open with just a phrase that I heard recently, and that is that pain which is not transformed is transmitted. And I think that that's what we're seeing in Israel-Palestine right now. I think we're still fighting World War II. I still think we're still fighting the Treaty of Versailles, which sort of was a punishment model that created the hatred and the antecedents for World War II. And I do think that war is not the answer. I'm sort of coming as a human billboard here. This is a Quaker button, and then my BDS button up here. And then this is from a women's group in Israel called Women in Black, and they have been standing in front of the Knesset, or had been, protesting the occupation of the West Bank and Lebanon. So anyway, I am a late study to A.J. Muste. He was not taught in any of my religion courses or my sociology courses here at Hope College. He was only whispered about, and I always wondered, what was so interesting about A.J. that he was verboten, you couldn't talk about him. But so I ended up giving the lecture and became a quick study of A.J. a couple of years ago, 2019, right before COVID, and then right before I took a trip to the Middle East with a group of mental health professionals who went to the West Bank, and we met with dissident Israeli psychotherapists. My day job for the last 25 years had been working with children and adolescents with severe trauma and behavior disorders. That was my day job. I found that activism did not always pay the bills, especially after a divorce. So I had a young daughter, and I went back and did yet another degree at George Washington in working with children of acute trauma. And we're going to see a lot of need for that in the days ahead. I also want to remember a photo that I saw at the Dorothy Day House in Catholic Worker in Washington. And Dorothy and A.J. were great friends. They fought sometimes, but they fought politely, I'm sure. Maybe not with Dorothy, but there was a picture of a tank, and it said, "You cannot massacre an idea." And I think that's what we're seeing right now in Gaza and the West Bank. And certainly the trauma of October 7 triggered a tremendous groundswell of trauma in Israelis. But I can't think of any other people that would make Israel a more secure place than justice for the Palestinians. So anyway, among the puzzling questions I have today, I want to quote from Ralph Nader and Veterans for Peace, who are talking about why the United States is breaking law, its own laws. The Foreign Assistance Act that forbids provision of assistance to the government engaging in patterns of gross violation of international human rights. The Arms Export Act, which says countries that receive U.S. aid can only use weapons for self-defense and internal security. The U.S. War Crimes Act, which forbids grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions, including willful killing, torture, or inhuman treatment, willfully causing great suffering or serious injury to body or health, and deportation or transfer, and the perpetuation of the Israeli occupying forces. So we've seen a reaction to this war in Gaza, and so my job today was to say, what would A.J. Muste do? And that's hard to, we have two relatives here, but I can't pretend to say what A.J. would do. But I wanted to say that I brought another book of those essays that was edited, and it was given to me, talk about community, a couple of days ago by a woman who was related to A.J.'s wife, Anna. And so these are relatives that live in Washington, and they say, oh, we're related to A.J. from his wife. So, there are other people, I'll put you in touch with them. But she gave me, Mary Alice Kleinchen gave me the book, this thick book of essays that she got. And she said, oh yeah, we're related to Anna on the other side. So anyway, So anyway, recently, Veterans for Peace has been demonstrating, and Josh Paul, a former senior official at the State Department, was charged with reviewing weapons transfers to foreign countries. And he said the secretary and all relevant officials under his watch should take this letter from Veterans for Peace seriously. It is a stark reminder of the importance of abiding by the laws and policies that relate to arms transfers. And Josh Paul is the first State Department official to resign his position because of the war on Gaza. There has also been a host of insiders from the White House, inside advisors, who have protested outside the White House with masks on, of course, because it would not be good for their performance evaluation if they were caught doing that. And there also have been a number of State Department officials who were saying no longer in our name. So I think AJ would have been coaching them on this. The Veterans for Peace letter is also talking about the Leahy Law, which prohibits the U.S. government from using funds for assistance to foreign security forces. And there's always the Genocide Convention International Act of implementation that the South Africans put before the World Court in The Hague, another Dutch city. People often use the reference to BDS or boycott, divestment, and sanction with its success in South Africa. The difference is there was not a huge lobby, a huge machine of PR and lobby that was supporting the Afrikaners. It was quite fashionable to be against apartheid in South Africa. It's still not fashionable to speak out publicly against Israel's apartheid regime. You get in trouble for that. But anyway, if you're wondering why these laws are not being enforced, the answer is that individual citizens or groups of citizens do not have any legal standing to sue Secretary Blinken. According to the U.S. Supreme Court, only a committee of Congress backed by a Senate or resolution of the House can take the State Department to federal court. That action to enforce congressionally passed and enacted laws is not likely to happen in this lawless Israeli government-indentured Congress, which refuses even to demand a permanent ceasefire. I have been saying now for a couple of months that we are an occupied territory, and our Congress is actually an occupied territory. And I would like you to look on the internet and perhaps in a community setting review the film Occupation of the American Mind by a communications professor from UMass Amherst, Soot Jolly. It's worth seeing because you realize how important the mechanism of opinion molding is to help us create the policies that we're stuck with right now. There's a related serious matter, and that is Bruce Fein, who said the United States has clearly become a co-belligerent with Israel. It's a partner in crime, you might say, against the Hamas Gaza Palestinians by systematically supplying the idea of the Israeli military with weapons and intelligence without condition under the Fourth Geneva Convention. There was a suicide on the steps of the Israel embassy several weeks ago by a young intelligence officer who was 25 years old. And I think that was an act of whistleblowing because I think he saw what was coming, that there are U.S. soldiers and advisors, which they also had in Vietnam early on, in Israel, and there are U.S. military officers who are part of a non-governmental commercial entity of being able to go into Gaza itself and fight, and they're part of a network of commercial sale, like with, can I say, Derek Prince, you know, that kind of commercialization of military. He's from Holland, Michigan, so I guess I have to be careful, but these are corporations that hire out soldiers, and they're now in the tunnels in Gaza. So anyway, whose side would AJ be on? Vietnam. He was certainly important in the inner circle of leadership in the End the War movement. And Dave McReynolds was one of his not Veterans for Peace, but the civil disobedient group that was working with veterans to burn their draft cards. And he certainly, would have been there with this. There's more and more activity in Israel with veterans that are refusing to serve in their national army. Ralph Nader said that the international court decision was really an important aspect of countering the propaganda of war as genocidal intent. The claims of beheaded babies being used as propaganda. Biden and other officials quoted this many times, and it was that kind of atrocity propaganda, which is a new term, that has molded opinion. So if these bad guys can be that bad, we can almost do anything to them, and that seems to be what is happening now. A.J. Muste would likely have been on the side of a permanent ceasefire. He would have been at the vigils. He would have supported civil disobedience. And he would have been there at vigils outside the White House as he was holding a sign against nuclear proliferation and abolition of nuclear weapons when someone said, I think you know this story, AJ, this is a little nuts, I mean, you really think you're gonna close Los Alamos in New Mexico? And he said, no, but it means that I'm protected against the policies of my own government. So he did it for therapy as well, for his own sense of well-being. Israel must, in accordance with its obligations under the Genocide Convention with respect to Gaza, take all measure within its power to prevent the commission of all acts of crime against humanity. But in particular, that means the killing of members of one group, causing serious bodily injury or mental harm to members of the group, and deliberately inflicting pain on that group and their conditions of life, such as starvation and access to water. Israel must also be accountable for preventing and punishing the direct and public incitement to commit genocide. So it means that even using atrocity propaganda as a way of promoting genocide, or the plausible genocide that we're seeing in Gaza, needs to be paid attention to. The World Court emphasized that the State of Israel remains bound to fully comply with its obligations under the Genocide Convention, and with that, including ensuring the safety and security of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. I think we heard this morning that's not really happening. So besides affirming that Israel's assault on Rafah has made the situation even more perilous and dire, the International Court of Justice seems to be saying effectively our existing order is already sufficient to stop this now. The court upheld its responsibility. The burden is on Israel now to implement the 6 provisional measures. But you're not assuming your responsibility in adopting the resolution to call for a ceasefire. The international law professor, Francis Boyle, and I think he was at Indiana University, was the first ever lawyer to successfully argue a genocide case before the International Court of Justice. It was on behalf of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And he said recently, it's not yes or no, this is a formal decision of the court, apparently. No dissents, very helpful language. The Republic of South Africa asked for a formal order for additional provisional measures of protection for the Palestinians. They did not get that, but they did get a formal decision by the court. It's important the ICJ reference Rafah and quotes the UN Security General as saying Israeli actions would exponentially increase what is already a humanitarian nightmare and untold regional consequence. If the Zionists start driving Palestinians into Egypt, South Africa can ask the court again for new provisions of protection, said Boyle. they can now use the ICJ's decision at the UN Security Council to support the resolution that Algeria has already circulated in order to enforce the World Court's order. 7 national and over 200 local labor organizations, so here's AJ as an early labor organizer in Massachusetts, have called for the establishment of a coalition to promote a ceasefire in Israel's genocidal war. The American Postal Workers Union, the Association of Flight Attendants, the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, and on and on. So the unions are stepping in, people on the street are stepping in, but the Congress and the White House are the last to get that memo. So they're calling for an immediate ceasefire between Hamas and Israel, restoration of basic human rights, the immediate release of hostages by Hamas, but also by Israel. Israel now holds roughly 5,000 Palestinians on the West Bank, many held in something called administrative detention, which means they're held without any charges and without legal representation and with widespread torture. Issa Amro, who was in the photo that you saw, is a leading pacifist in the West Bank. And he was arrested, tortured, and then told that he needed to leave his home. I think he's from Jenin. Where's he from? Issa Amro, is he from Jenin? Anyway, the Israelis needed to use his house as a basing point for the IDF in the West Bank. And we recently met with a group that has just come back with the same trip that Josh was on and his colleague. And I have seen people come back from those trips and they talk about the beauty of the Holy Land and how hard it was. But I've never seen people come back in the traumatized situation that these 20 people came back from a couple of weeks ago. I mean, the West Bank is under siege. So, you know, it's a very serious situation, and there don't seem to be any breaks in sight, but the breaks are the popular cry on the street. I mean, there were demonstrations in Oaxaca, Mexico. There have been demonstrations in Indonesia, and there have been tens of thousands of people in Washington in November, early on, and in December, and then January, another big demonstration. They're ongoing every single day. And there are acts of civil disobedience now. There were 130 Mennonites who were in the Cannon House office building holding signs with beautiful quilting patterns saying, "Let Gaza live." 130 women and men arrested in the Cannon building. I think AJ would have been there, you know, cheering them on. It's an assumption on my part. And also there have been hunger strikes. There was a group coming down from Boston, from Harvard Divinity School, just last week. I spoke to the woman who was organizing it last evening, and they met with the Bishop of Jerusalem, the Bishop of Washington, pleading with the Anglican Bishop of Jerusalem to open his mouth and speak out against that. He has yet to do that. The Bishop of Washington cried and wept when we met with her, when we brought the people from the delegation that Josh was on. But she said, "My hands are tied." And I think somebody like AJ would have said, well, you know, there are ways to untie them, Bishop Marianne. The Episcopal Church has been craven in this, and in January there were 2 of us that presented 2 resolutions before the Episcopal Diocese of Washington. And we had 5 minutes to speak, which is hard to get all of this in, but one of the things that I was able to say was, there is now a complicity of silence, and so if the church does nothing, it is complicit with what's going on. Both the resolutions passed. They passed even without an electronic vote. They passed a resolution that will go to Louisville in the National Convention that conditions U.S. aid to Israel based on the adherence to norms of human rights and international norms of international law. And the second one that I introduced was Boycott, Divestment, and Sanction, BDS, which is a nonviolent economic form of pressure modeled after South Africa's boycott. The difference is that there are laws in 30 states now, and I want to suggest another film, Boycott. In 30 states, there's a law that says it is illegal to support BDS. So I'm wearing this button as an act of dissidence, you might say. If you are in Arkansas, if you are in Texas, and if you're in Missouri, and you're a state contractor, you have to sign that you will not support boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel. That's I think, a curtailment of First Amendment rights, big time. There are also laws on campus that say that if you use the phrase "from the river to the sea," or there was a group of Students for Justice for Palestine in Florida, University of Florida, 8 years ago that wanted to establish a chapter, and they were told that if they established a chapter, they would face expulsion from the university. So it's rough out there, and public expression has to be monitored in a way that feels to me oppressive and a form of fascism in a way that we didn't see with South Africa. And there just wasn't that kind of pushback. But I think that AJ would have, like he refused to show up for his subpoena, I think he would have kept talking about what's going on and the visions that we saw. So I think that I would actually like to stop there. I have a couple more pages, but they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I would like to just show you some photos of what was going on in Washington. And I also want to say that the suicide of Aaron Bushnell was a complicated act, but it was a profound act in its own right. And I would like to sort of compare this. I'm not a theologian, but Jesus knew that if he continued speaking out against empire, he would die too. And that happened to him, as we remember with Easter and the Lenten story. And so I didn't realize this, and I'm not a Quaker, but during Vietnam, there were 2 instances where 2 Quakers chose to set themselves on fire and died. And certainly that was part of the Buddhist message when things were so horrible in Southeast Asia that, the French left and then the US came in folly to follow their footsteps to their detriment. We're still fighting Agent Orange in this country. And my last trip to Holland, I was flying with an environmental scientist. And I said, well, what do you do for a living? And my daughter said, Mom, you really don't do that with people on a plane. You need to just be quiet and not converse. But anyway, he said, well, I'm an environmental engineer. I graduated from the Northern Michigan School of Technology, and we've been working years in Vietnam to try to clean up Agent Orange, which is was produced not far from here. There's an athletic facility, I think, that was funded by the company that produced Agent Orange, so it's complicated. But anyway, I really want to stop there, but I also want to just give you a couple of action items. So I put merch on the table back there and handouts, but the Quakers are creating something called an apartheid-free community action and an apartheid-free congregation action. And the goals of that are fairly simple, but they're a way of bringing it down home. And I find some of the hardest work I do is with working in community. I'm fine in a bubble like this. I think this is a bubble, a bit of a bubble at least. And I'm fine at conferences where people think like I do, but when you meet someone who is steeped in Zionism and steeped in the generational fear that the Holocaust is right around the corner, it's rougher. And I had an experience with this just 2 weeks ago, and it was creepy. But I was invited to join the Women's National Democratic Club by a friend who was a member. Her grandmother was a suffragist, and the suffragists were women who wanted the right to vote. And this was during Woodrow Wilson's World War I. And they chained themselves to the fence in front of the White House, and they were arrested, and they were tortured, they were force-fed. They wanted the right to vote. They were serious about it. So anyway, I joined the club, and I said I'll only join if I can do my Middle East work here. I have 3 focuses that are important to me: environmental justice, incarceration justice, and justice for Palestine. So we had a very controversial speaker whose name is Max Blumenthal, and he's the son of Democratic royalty. He spoke at the club. He spoke on the night of the State of the Union, and I introduced him. Everyone knew that he was my guest. And he changed his topic. He was going to talk about U.S. policy in Ukraine versus the policy in Gaza. But Max got up and he said, look, he said, I want to talk about the Democratic Party tonight. And I thought, oh, this is not going to go well at our next meeting. And so he talked about the money that's being used to buy silence in the Democratic Party. And I thought it was very germane, but I felt that it would not be helpful at the next program committee meeting. And so sure enough, I got an email saying emergency debriefing, and it wasn't in person, it was by Zoom. And the leadership was livid because these are women who were, sort of Democratic operatives, right or wrong. And so I just said, I think I'm mistaken. I said, I thought the D in the WNDC, Women's National Democratic Club, stood for democracy. And they said, well, no, you obviously haven't read the bylaws recently. So, but I want to just read the apartheid-free community. I'm going to close with that because I want you to see these photos. And I want you to think where A.J. Muste would be in all of this and with whom he would be speaking and aligning. So it says, can you help get freedom back? Palestinians are reaching out to the global community, asking us to join in their struggle for liberation. In response, the Apartheid-Free Coalition calls on states, cities, unions, businesses, universities, and the faith community to become apartheid-free. So you take a pledge. We affirm our commitment to freedom, justice, and equality for the Palestinians, for all people, but including the Palestinians. We oppose all forms of racism, bigotry, discrimination, and oppression. We declare ourselves an apartheid-free community, and to that end, we pledge to join others in working to end all support for Israel's apartheid regime, settler colonialism, and we know that here because we displaced millions of Native Americans with genocide, with disease, and then resource theft, and military occupation. When your community takes the pledge, you publicly acknowledge Israel's apartheid regime, you commit to take action in a way that fits your context, and you join the Apartheid-Free Communities Network and share resources, opportunities for action, and support. And so that's their call, but it's a way of starting conversation. So with that, I'm going to get help from Roger.
Try the
So just push forward.
the other way.
I'm going to sit down if you don't mind. So this was a shrine that was built outside the Israeli embassy after Aaron Bushnell's suicide. And the strip of sidewalk there is public property. So this was guerrilla theater, this was street theater, a group of young Palestinians, and everyone's young relative to me these days. First they had a shrine and there was a vigil the day after he took his life. They realized that the Israelis are really good at cleaning up blood. So they completely took everything away on Tuesday morning. But then they realized that it was illegal for the Israelis to do that. So they established a vigil and a form of memorial for Aaron. And I want you to read this sign. It says, "Welcome to Kibbutz Israel." Since they think settlements are cool, they are sort of settled in front of the embassy. To the right, you see the flag of Israel with those that are still hostages and those who have died. So that's real. In the bottom, you see bullhorns, and what they do is from 9 until sometimes late at night, they have sirens going, and they explain they're doing that because the drones make a siren sound, and they hear it constantly if you're in Gaza. So you see the signs, it's street theater, it's nonviolent, it's healing, it's creating community. These are some of the signs, and this is Aaron's statement. I am an active duty member of the U.S. Air Force, and I will no longer be complicit in genocide. I am about to engage in an extreme act of protest, but compared to what people have been experiencing in Palestine and are at the hands of their colonizer, it is not extreme at all. This is what our ruling class has decided will be normal. And his last words were, "Free Palestine, free Palestine, free Palestine." There's a Marine uniform that says, "The empire is falling," and that's in front of where Aaron took his life. And then this is just one poster, but I just thought it was striking. These are some of the signs in front, and behind is the Israeli embassy. On the left, this is my daughter, Mariam Ruth Bakhtiar. She's half Iranian. And this is my first roommate from Hope College. She lives in ABQ in Albuquerque. And this was a vigil in December when I was visiting them. This is in front of the Israeli embassy. The woman on the left is holding a sign. She's 88 years old, and she was a survivor of the Holocaust. And she said, a survivor says that, she says, "Peace, not wars, in our name." And then on the right, that's one of the signs that a group produced in the first big vigil and then demonstration. I'm wearing a Veterans for Peace shirt there, and wearing a keffiyeh is sort of a sign of resistance these days. My eldest brother was in the Navy and didn't take his college deferment, and so was sent to Vietnam, exposed to Agent Orange, and then after retirement from a successful family business, he acquired something called inclusion body myositis. His muscles atrophied, and he committed suicide shortly before his 58th birthday during Easter week. On the right there, you see the demonstration and the vigil after Aaron took his life, and you see a rabbi from a group that is anti-Zionist and says that Israel is not in our name, that Zionism is against Jewish law, Jewish values, and Jewish theology. This was at Georgetown, and this was in solidarity with those that have died after October 7th and then the ongoing war. And apparently they were ripping signs down back and forth between, the young people from a Zionist background versus other students at Georgetown. This was in Gaza. I was there in 2019, right before COVID, and I went with a group of mental health professionals who were speaking about trauma. And there were hundreds of doctors and therapists that came to this conference. And in the middle up there you see Dr. Yasser Demai, who is a psychiatrist. He met with Chris Van Hollen. He came a year ago to DC, and he had an appointment with Chris Van Hollen. So I like to think that every voice counts, and that Chris is probably the leader in the Senate now for a ceasefire. And then there were 11 of us that could get in. There were 2 Swedes, this is David Henley. He was actually a conscientious objector from Vietnam who went to Sweden. And then these are 2 other psychotherapists who were in this delegation. Only 11 of us could get in. It's real hard to get in Gaza. It's really hard to get out if you're Gazan. These are just young children in a therapeutic early childhood program in Gaza City, which is in the north. And this is a little girl doing a science experiment. And these are little girls getting ready for a dance routine that they were doing as part of their theater in this early childhood Montessori school
a lot of those are, probably certainly homeless and dead. This is two fishermen outside the port in Gaza City, which is in the north, and fishing is really, really important as a source of protein, and so that's their catch. But the problem is that it's been harder for them to get to fish because they're limited. If you see those lights on the second slide, that's the Israeli Navy, US funded, and they have gunships all around, close in, well within territorial waters. And this was the conference site where our hotel was. So I was just looking out my window. And there's also a rich store of natural gas off the coast of Gaza. There's also oil in Section 3 of the West Bank. And so the Israelis are already siphoning off the natural gas and selling it to Jordan and other countries, for which the Gazans don't receive any money. And this was the hotel where the UN headquarters are on the far right corner, and it has a big U and a big N sign. And so there was bombing when we first arrived. We could hear it, and the Gazans were really, not concerned at all. They just said, welcome to Gaza. They said this should be safe because it has a U and an N on the roof, so the Israelis know not to bomb it. But this was in 2019. That's all changed. This is just the conference where the mental health people met, Mental Health Without Borders. And then this is at Ahli Anglican Hospital in Gaza City. It's an old hospital, and behind it you see a Roman ruin, so you realize that there have been centuries of different occupying countries in Gaza. This is Dr. Suhaila Tarazi, who's the administrator, and she was pointing out drones, and she said today they're silent, but sometimes they're not. So how this break from the prison in Gaza could have happened when there's so much monitoring going on and so much surveillance is still a mystery to me. Is that it? So anyway, any questions?
Thank you for being such a good audience. I did bring handouts. So there are handouts over there. And my day job has been as a professor at Catholic University, and also as a teacher of children with severe behavior disorders. And so I have brought some curriculum. I brought a sample of a little purple book that Jonathan Kutab wrote. And it's really a good guide if you do community conversations about Gaza. It's very readable. It's very calmly written, but it talks about the two-state solution. It shows you maps and it shows you the history, but it also has a forward-looking idea, and his idea is a one-state solution. That's not my position to talk about, but Jonathan is a Palestinian. We'll share that. So please take some literature, and I have a couple of books here by Gazan writers, and any questions? I know speaking before lunch is rough, and I had two very fine speakers before me. Yes, go ahead. Identify yourself and your affiliation.
Sure. My name's Kelly. I was in the class that you came to speak at yesterday, so thanks again for talking. So my question is surrounding religion and religious nationalism.
Why don't you come up here? Why don't you speak in the microphone, because it's really hard to hear.
Okay, so my name's Kelly.
Where are you from? What state?
I'm from Illinois.
Okay. So she has one member of Congress and two senators. We don't in the District of Columbia.
Okay, so my question is surrounding religion and religious nationalism. I think interfaith education is really important so that people can look at religiously motivated issues from an academic standpoint rather than feeling the need to defend their own beliefs. So how do you think we should go about educating ourselves and others about faiths that we are unfamiliar with, especially in overwhelmingly Christian communities?
First of all, I think we have to realize that religion is often used to
justify war. I mean, I'm thinking right offhand of Onward Christian Soldiers. And also, I think it's really important to understand when a faith group is being demonized, as Islam is right now. I think it's very important to travel. I think it's very important to study the basics. And I think most religions are kind of at their core the same. It's the love of neighbor. It's the idea of how you treat the enemy or how you treat the other who's different from you are. I think the Ten Commandments were written for very practical reasons, but I think that no religion has a corner on truth, and I think that, as the Quakers say, we need to find the divine in all of us, and that we need to be humble. I want to tell you a World War II story, though. We were talking about what AJ would have done during World War II. He was very involved with the Fellowship of Reconciliation and with the pacifists that were getting people out. And there is a children's book that I learned about. I love children's literature. And it was called The Grand Mosque of Paris. And so, as it turns out, the Grand Mosque, it was okay to be a Muslim during World War II. It's not okay to be a Muslim right now in the United States. It's pretty tricky. The Grand Mosque would take people in who were refugees of any faith and give them an identity card that said they were Muslim, and then they could get they would get safe passage to this village called Les Chambon, which was headed by a member of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, André Trocmé, and then they would, shepherd them into Switzerland. This didn't happen enough, but it's one story of hope. And AJ was involved with this. They called it this conspiracy of goodness. So I like your question.
Hi, I'm Elsie. I'm also a peace and justice student, and I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I
Who's your member of Congress?
Ilhan Omar.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And I am curious how you think AJ Muste would incorporate faith and bringing hope into this situation with the conflict between Israel and Palestine.
How do you think he would, knowing what you know now?
I think that he definitely has a unique perspective coming from a faith background, and from the stuff that we've read in class, it seems like he brings his writing to an understandable level to people, but also is realistic while maintaining hope within that situation.
I've heard he had a great sense of humor. I think that may have saved the day, and he loved baseball. And there are rules to sports, and so I think that the metaphor of rules and following rules is probably an important part of his vision. Thank you. Thanks for helping us.
Masalama. My name is Yona. I'm a Swiss-American dual citizen. I'm a political science major interested in the Middle East and international relations.
Sharafna.
My question, I guess, is, and I do by no means want to reduce what's happening right now, but it seems to me, at least in my anecdotal experience, that the Palestinian conflict, not just from October 7th, but throughout its history, has been brought into the spotlight at a higher rate than other issues in the Middle East, in the world, but in the Middle East as well. Think about the Syrian civil war, or what's going on in Yemen, and again, I'm not at all trying to reduce what's happening in Palestine, but I just wonder if this anecdotal experience is just wrong, or if there is another reason why the Palestinian issue is being elevated higher than these other issues where hundreds of thousands of civilians are dying as well.
Well, certainly Sudan. I mean, there are hundreds of thousands that are dying in Sudan. There were 1 million in Rwanda. The Israeli Ministry of Public Diplomacy has a whole department set out to message, to get their opinion across. The Israelis are dependent, more or less, on U.S. military aid, even though they're a very wealthy country relative to many. And I think that it really has to do with the pathology in this country. It's not just the lobby, but we have an addiction to producing and then marketing weapons in this country. We have an addiction to cheap oil and fossil fuels, which is really ruining the environment. And then we do have the Israel Lobby, which is, among the 3 top in the United States for lobbying expertise. I also think that the Israeli lobby is not playing by the rules. There's a law called the Foreign Agent Registration Act, and in any synagogue that is not anti-Zionist, and that would be probably 99.9%, they receive daily and regular marching orders from another country about policies that they want to produce voices on at the grassroots level. And so I think there is a powerful presence of the Zionization of the religious community in Judaism in this country, that groups like Jewish Voice for Peace are saying, not in our name anymore, but I do think that it's a pathology of the US political system in a way, and also the buying of votes. There's a very, there's a very loosely enforced law about where money comes from, and you get people like John Hagee, who is a Christian Zionist, who says that the end times is near, and he has a very profitable broadcast on Christian broadcasting networks that many don't follow, but many do, especially in the red states. And so he's working very closely with the Israeli government. He receives money from them to keep his broadcast going. So it's a pathology of different, I think, porousness in the governance of this country. I mean, certainly what's going on in Sudan is far worse, but we're not funding it. We are funding the war in Gaza, and we are funding the production of weapons. Those young people in Hebron were probably carrying M16s, although they may have been Uzis. I really don't know one gun from another. But I do know when I was in Hebron, there was this darling 19-year-old with a gun with his hand on the trigger. And I said, "Is that an Uzi you're carrying?" And he said, "Oh no, that's an M16. So that's a US produced weapon. So there's a market, We're addicted to making Apache helicopters and Hellfire missiles that were probably used on the hostages in Gaza, in South Israel, when the Gaza prison break took out so many people. And so I have never purchased an Apache Hellfire missile myself, but that's what we make. So it's part of our whole manufacturing industry as well. But words count, they count a lot. And imaging is really important, and opinion molding important.